All right, and so today we're talking with Kim Nelson, former Senior Vice President for External Relations and General Mills Senior Leadership Team, and former President of the $1 billion plus operating division there at General Mills.
It was great. So high energy, had me engaged the entire time.
I think what was great about Kevin's message is that, no matter how naturally talented you are, or no matter how great you can always keep striving for that next level. And even, if you become complacent, you might not even realize you've done it. But Kevin really helps you realize, that there's so much more that you can do. If you take a step back, really reevaluate what you're doing and what you're not doing, you can take it to the next level.
I loved his message about God's gift to you and your gift back. And he's just so down to earth and just a helpful, wonderful man.
Really, I think you can put him in front of anybody, and you're going to be inspired, you're going to be motivated, you're going to want to go out there, and you're going to want to start, reaching to that next level today.
Hey, thanks so much for joining in to the Leadership is Personal podcast, bringing you real-world solutions to real-world challenges in anywhere from 3 to 10-minute increments. Leadership is personal. Here's the better results.
Kim, how are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
Outstanding, or as I like to say, if it were any better, it would hurt. So, Kim, today we're going to be talking about #MeToo, and more specifically, leading through, these trying times of #MeToo. So why don't we start off by give me your take on what do you think? What's important about it? What's not so important about it?
Yeah. Well, it's incredibly important because, sometimes we forget this is a movement that is about eliminating sexual harassment and sexual violence. That's a good thing. There's no way that's not a good thing. And it's a long time coming. And I think that it's all about women being able to express clearly that this has been a problem for a long time and it needs to stop. So I think it's a very powerful movement, and I'm glad it's here.
One of the things that invariably we get into this conversation and we talk about the #MeToo movement. One of the things I found quite interesting is Tarana Burke started this movement way back in 2006, and it probably didn't get the push, if you will, or the emphasis until Alyssa Milano sent out that tweet back in 2017, followed quickly by Ashley Judd and Gwyneth Paltrow. And so it led me to the question of, do you think that it needs a star or a superstar or a certain look of an individual to create sort of the movement that it is today? Do you think that was necessary, or do you think that any movement needs that? Sort of.
Well, movements start in lots of different ways, and when you say a star, maybe it's a star. It's somebody who can command the national stage for whatever reason. I mean, we had some students in Parkland that command the national stage, not for any reason anyone would want, but that's, to me, what really happened, and often can trigger other people saying, yes, it sort of renews the energy around it. And I think that's what happened. I don't believe it had to have a particular face. It just, the time was right, and it kind of snowballed, from there.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about who sort of starts these movements. We talked about the young folks. I think younger people are able to do it. They don't have the risk to think through. And so as we think about #MeToo and this whole notion against women and physical assault, and even men in some cases, this whole notion of unwanted advancement and physical assault. As you think about it, there's a lot of risk that's associated with bringing that forward. I think about the Kavanaugh, those hearings. How do you square that? How do you think about the risk relative to bringing it forward as a leader? How do you manage through that? How do you think about that?
Yeah, it takes a tremendous amount of courage to bring allegations of this nature forward, because you've seen the tapes play. You saw Anita Hill, you saw it. So you are not confused that it's going to turn your world upside down, and it literally may be the thing you are remembered for by anyone who remembers you. And so, it's, in the end, It's determining that as painful as it's going to be to you, it's worth it to stop the person who did this grievous harm to you from doing it to someone else. And I think the women who came forward and continue to come forward are just basically calling on their courage to stop people who are exhibiting behaviors that are so destructive and so harmful for so many years after the incident took place. So it's high risk, but I think sometimes people feel they have to do something.
So given where you've sat, if someone were to bring this sort of incident to your attention, how would you manage that? How would you handle that as a and I ask this question for leaders that listen to the podcast who might be faced with sort of dropped in their lap. How do you manage through that? How do you lead with that?
Yeah. So, it's interesting because I have a corporate background. So I've worked for General Mills for 30 years. And one thing I always appreciated about my company is we have pretty clear policies for things of this nature. And there are other things, if it's a racial incident and so forth. And I think it's so important that in these corporate environments you do. And I have had, over the course of my career, experiences where someone came to me, in this particular case I'm thinking of, it was a woman, and said that she felt something inappropriate had happened. And what's nice about having a policy and procedure is everyone knows what to do. It's just you go through it. You don't have to make it up and, should I be doing this or that? It's known. And you have to take every incident is investigated and taken seriously. The action steps are very clear depending on the outcomes of the investigation. All individuals are treated respectfully in the process. No one's demonized or, So I think in settings where there's clarity on what we do, how we handle it, how people are treated, and what the consequences are up front, I think those settings tend to diminish incidents because all parties understand zero tolerance and what that looks like. It doesn't mean you're not going to, have a fair, day in court and be able to, have a fair examination of the facts. But it does mean that if they bear out, you will be terminated, and that's pretty severe consequence,
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the word, and not to hang on single or individual words, but you mentioned the word fair. Now, do you think that we course corrected so hard that maybe it swings the other way to where men are deemed guilty until proven innocent?
Yeah, you're definitely seeing, in the broader society, there's so much pent up frustration. Maybe you could say the word anger, but for sure frustration about what has been happening to women for so very long. And it's yes, we don't want to swing the other way, but I'm feeling a little bit like the discomfort that people have over this handful of men that feel that they're not being treated fairly. And there's so many women or people of color throughout time who have been living that. So in some ways, that's a positive that we're all grappling with that now, the concept of, fairness. Yeah. And it's just, I think many people have been privileged to not have to worry about being treated unfairly. Yeah. So it doesn't mean I'm not sympathetic. I'm just saying I bring a very nuanced view to it because, this concept of fairness, it seems like sometimes it goes more one way and not the other way.
That's all. The point of fairness does not mean equal, right? Yeah. So
yeah.
I get, and you mentioned a few things that really does have me thinking about, again, what I've often thought about relative to #MeToo. The R. Kelly, Surviving R. Kelly show just kind of came through, and they interviewed one of the people that sat in the jury, and they said, why didn't you convict him? Why didn't you vote guilty? And he said, well, I didn't like what the young ladies had on. I didn't like them. I didn't believe them. And so it has caused me to think, well, two questions. One, are women able to be seen as innocent? But more specifically, are women of color able to be seen as innocent? And the reason why I ask that question is, as you look at media and social media, and how women and women of color are depicted, videos and the news and in stories, there's just so much, a barrage of information about, that really positions women of color in a bad light. So are we just unable to see them as innocent?
Yeah. I think there's some truth to this excellent question you're asking. We live in a society that has long-time biases and beliefs and prejudices against both women and women of color. When I say prejudices, prejudice is prejudged. So women are prejudged on things that are different than men are prejudged on. Appearance, what they wear, what they say, how they talk, how they comport themselves. And it's not fair. And Black women and white women are both, we have this. And I do think it makes it hard for people sometimes to believe that, to believe them. And it's not right because, I don't care what you were wearing. I really don't. And I don't care what you look like. If you were assaulted, no one can, there's no excuse. There really isn't an excuse. That's the point. That is the point, that there isn't an excuse that's acceptable. Because if a woman is, being hurt, you can't say she wanted that. You cannot say it, no matter how she was dressed. So I do think you're right that we have to become aware of these unfair biases that we have based on, could be socioeconomic biases, etc., that are not fair. And I think Black women in particular, have a load to carry there that just isn't right and isn't fair.
And so unfair, unjust, a load. How does a Black woman experience something in the workplace? How do they garner the courage to bring that forward? I mean, because I would clearly say the deck is stacked against them in bringing that forward in many instances when you look at the makeup of the leadership of our corporations in this country.
Yeah.
And if you juxtapose that to the notion that maybe as a country it's hard to even see women of color as innocent,
right?
How then do they garner the courage,
right,
to bring that challenge forward?
Yeah. And I think in the end, every woman has to make that decision in her heart. What I talked about earlier is the pain that I might experience either through the investigation or through some sort of ruling that discards this very painful thing that I brought forward as not true. And, that I am then invalidated, which makes that pain even deeper. Am I willing to undergo that in order for justice to be served and in order to prevent future transgressions? I have two daughters. They're 17 and 19. And we have talked extensively about,
also, so I get it.
But, sexual relations and sexual rights and that you are in charge of yourself and your body. And if something were to happen, what would you do? We explore these, concepts because, who knows who it's going to be. And in the end, you want your kids to know that if, heaven forbid, such a thing does happen, you never want it to happen again to someone else. What happened to you is done. It already happened. The real question is about from today forward, what's going to happen. And can you bring your inner strength and your dignity into a room and allow what happened to you to be judged? And however it is judged, leave that room with your dignity, knowing that you have done the right thing. And I think that's what you're hoping for anyway.
So we've seen it twice with Supreme Court justices, heard directly 45 talking about things that he had done, grabbing crotches, if you will. Well, that's a little less vulgar, So then how do you square that with our nation being able to hear those things, go through those sort of hearings, yet still elect a president or appoint a Supreme Court justice? It almost seems like the deck is stacked against women.
Yeah.
And maybe the deck just is, right? If you think about, how many meetings have you gone into within your corporation where you're the only one? And you might be only one twice, right? You're not only a woman, but a woman of color. So you're a twofer.
I couldn't even tell you. I couldn't even number that. Yeah, there's a lot of the onlys. And that's fine. That's fine because, all I ever wanted was a shot. I think that's all we want is a shot. Yeah, we'd like it to be easier. It's not. Okay, move on. But you said this sense of the deck being stacked against you. And at the broadest level, at the level of, both the justice, the judicial and the executive branches. And that there is no question that that's problematic. But, I tend to be quite optimistic and hopeful by nature. And what I see is the response and the backlash that is bringing on and how it has absolutely ignited a fire amongst so many women, Republican and Democrat, and everything in between, who are saying, time's up. No, this is not okay. And so, that's what I'm looking at the midterm elections. I'm looking at that, room full of women wearing white and at the State of the Union. And, this is not partisan for me. It really isn't. This is just about the country stepping back and saying, look, 50% of our population is women, and they have earned the right to be respected. And, they're not going to take this anymore. They're not going to tolerate the kinds of behaviors that men have exhibited for decades, really for throughout history. And I feel actually that we are on a precipice as a nation. And we're kind of seeing the last vestiges of the old way. And there's a bunch of old men who are, have lived a certain way and behaved a certain way, and they are being moved out. And I see this wave of women, coming in and asserting themselves and asserting their power and asserting their right to be, co-equal in every sector. So I feel a little bit like, let's see 5 years from now where we are, because sometimes it takes those extremes, things that our president has said about women, things that we've seen with the Supreme Court hearings, et cetera. Sometimes it takes those extreme incidents to shake women out of their complacency and make them say, nope, that's not okay. And I think that's the moment we're in right now.
I think this is the first generation where we've taught our women to stand up. We've taught our women to be heard. It's interesting because I do a lot of work with corporations, as and we talk about millennials. And, a lot of the old guard are a bit uncomfortable with millennials and all that they have to say. But I think as parents of millennials and Gen Zers, we've sort of groomed them that way. They've had a voice. They've had a seat at the table. I know when I was coming along, kids were meant to be seen and not heard, right? Yes. I mean, that is not the case nowadays. And so, Lord knows I have a sophomore at GW and a 27-year-old, and neither one of them are going to go silently if they don't agree with something. And so I think it's wonderful that we've begun rearing women to be, less docile and less quiet.
That's right. And they're entering a society where their expectations are so high, Kevin. They are not tolerant of any of this stuff. Remember, my generation, I was the tail end of the boomers coming in, and I was, as an African American woman and as a woman, as you said, many firsts, right? Many rooms full of white faces still at senior levels. But that's not the case for them. And so, my generation.
A black president, for God's sake, right?
That's right. And Michelle too. They got to see both. And so my generation was still that generation of happy to be there. I'm going to prove myself. I'm going to show you what a woman can do and what a woman of color can do that you maybe didn't expect. Their generation's not even worried that there's any expectation they're like, yes, I have arrived. And yes, of course you will love me. There's no question. It's
you that has the problem, right?
Yeah, that's right. Your daughter and I have a sophomore too. She's at Michigan, but they don't realize, they haven't hit any walls yet. They haven't realized, and we try to prepare them, but it's not their mindset, unlike when we were coming through.
Yeah, I think, they didn't have that indoctrination, right? They had a different indoctrination. They have that, you better stand up, you better say something.
That's right.
Not only is it your right, but it's your duty.
That's right. I would expect you to.
That's right. And I'll be disappointed if you don't.
That's right.
There's a different expectation, I think, that creates that mindset. So my question to you, and as I said, I promise you I won't keep you very long, but what is the role and the responsibility of men in the hashtag #MeToo movement?
Yeah.
And when I say men, I mean men leaders. Men that are leading through this hashtag #MeToo movement.
Yeah. It's a great question. And I think men play an incredibly important role. And you are demonstrating one role, which is to be talking about it and thinking about it and grappling with it. And,
That's what I heard, grappling.
And I think it's, I know this is about me too, but even as I've seen the blackface conversation play out, there is a bit of a grappling. I see a lot of, I was watching Morning Joe, and clearly Joe Scarborough was grappling with this and flipping back into his own past and challenging himself and asking himself, I think he said, I went to school in Alabama. And he's kind of personally trying to, get his head around, well, where am I? And have I ever, and I think that's a good thing. Even my husband and I had a conversation the other day, and, men are thinking about their behaviors towards women and examining them. And, it's uncomfortable, for them, because they may do something and then they're asking, was that okay? I've always done that, but maybe I've offended women. And that's good. I want them to ask that, because you know what? They may have, and they shouldn't, they should be engaging in it. So that's one role. Personal engagement, personal self-reflection, I think is really important. Second is facilitating the discussion and having conversations with other men. Third is being willing to champion women, particularly women who are coming forward, and not prejudging them based on whatever socioeconomic status, what they look like, what they wear, how they talk, but actually having that open mind and understanding what it takes for a woman to come forward. I think there's this stereotype of, these women just want to have, get some attention. And I just don't get that. The attention is horrible. It is not positive attention. Women are ripped to shreds in this. Women don't seek to be ripped to shreds. Their reputations are trashed. And so whenever I hear men say that, it's like, what planet are you living on that you think any sane woman wants this kind of attention? Right. So I think that third piece is listening to these women when they come forward and not judging them out of hand and calling their own biases to the carpet as they, process some of these stories that are being brought forward.
I think one word that you mentioned was discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
And I often say that, the learning is in the discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading something this morning about a police force where two of them were in the yearbook in blackface.
Mm-hmm.
They talked about they were in blackface doing an undercover sting, and it was okay because it was an undercover sting. And my first thought was, well, if they're getting criminals off the street, maybe it was okay to be in blackface. But then I shifted to, well, why weren't there other black officers on the force that they could have simply engaged? Right? And going through that and thinking through that as I began to work with, I'm about to start doing some work with the Minnesota sheriffs, and that's one of the challenges that they face, right? I mean, a lack of diversity on the force, and so you begin to ask that question, why?
Yeah.
And how we can drive the change. If more women are in more senior and more leadership roles, then you don't have this sort of unbalancing of scales where the perception and the perspective is driven largely by older men.
Right.
So I think the society has to change, right?
That's right.
And maybe, and I apologize for my lack of clarity because there's so many things running through my head on that.
I know. Well,
it's amazing.
Yeah, it is. I think you're right that, we're so afraid of discomfort in our society. We think it's really bad. And you think about even children, we're both going through raising these young people. And you would think that our goal in life was preventing them from having anything bad ever happen to them, prevent them from experiencing any adversity whatsoever. And yet we experience quite a bit. And it's what makes you who you are. It makes you stronger. It makes you smarter. And it's part of growth. And growth requires this operating in the space of discomfort. So I wanted to validate that, what you just said. And then I think you're right that in the end, new norms are established when the people establish them. And so it's very hard for, like, if you think of sort of the corporate environment, and it's a very heavily dominated white male environment at the very top. And, I'm, not trying to, be absolute, but it just is. We all know this. Straight into boardrooms. And there are a lot of norms that come from that. If you were to go into a different company that's run by women, they would have a lot of norms. So people are what establish what's okay in society, in whatever, a church group, in an organization, a community organization. It's all about the people. So when we diversify the group of people who are in leadership roles, those norms automatically start to change. It's not some program you implement. It's just because the people are different and they say different things and they ask different questions and so forth. So in the end, I think part of the Me Too movement is about power. And it's really about men being in positions of power often and feeling that entitles them to behave a certain way towards women, or vice versa. I'm using men and women. It could be the other way. And until you have more mix of gender and ethnicity and other types of diversity in power, I think that imbalance does create dysfunction.
Yeah.
And so,
nail on the head when you said that part of a man's job or male in our corporate structure's job is to champion women. And the reason why, I couldn't agree with you more is because of, I think it's driven by the way that women are acculturated. I mean, we've all seen the studies and the statistics that say, if there are 10 attributes that are needed to go for this promotion or this next level role, women have to have 9 to maybe 10 of them to even apply, where guys, 4 to 5, let's swing for it, right? Let's go for it.
Yeah.
And I just think it's the acculturation of men and women that causes that to happen. And so as men, I think we have to, I've always saw it as my responsibility, we have to champion women and push them into places that they are uncomfortable, right? In order to kind of have them take that next step. I mean, I'll go on record here saying, you guys are smarter. So, I think it's one of the things that we have to do is push them into the positions of being uncomfortable. I mean, when I ran a private client group, one of the things that they ferreted out in the studies was that if you were working with a financial advisor and you were working with a man, that man was more apt to give you misinformation and answer a question under the guise of fake it till you make it. Whereas the woman would, and it was statistically ferreted out, the woman would say, I don't know, but I'll get you the answer. Yeah. Right? And so in my mind, there's an acculturation that happens with with men and boys, as opposed to girls and women, that then manifest themselves into how we act and how we are as actors in leadership and in corporations and in our communities. And so I think as men, if we are going to see the advancement of women to these places and women of color and people of color into these places where we've not seen them in the past, it's men's job to help to force that to happen in some regard, because they're in the positions of power.
Right, and men can. Some of my very best mentors in my career were, of course, men, because all the senior people are men, and men are so helpful to women. Good men who are seriously committed to mentoring a woman. They see something in you that they think is going to work and is going to be effective and help grow their company. And taking the time to give you feedback, honest feedback that you need. And that can be hard for men because they don't want to offend a woman. They don't want to be accused of, being whatever, sexist or racist or whatever. But they're giving you feedback that you need to secure that next job or to build that relationship with, a coworker or another leader. But the most important thing men can do who are in positions of power is put us in the roles. And, I know I benefited from men who just said, yeah, I'll vouch for her, put her in. And I always felt like that was where my head was, put me in, coach. And if I fail or succeed, it will be what it will be. But I can't, if I don't even have a shot, And so the men who are willing to not just mentor and coach and support and all that, but will put a woman in a big role and let the chips fall the way they may, because that's what we do with men. We just put them in the role. There's no judgment whether they succeed or fail, whether it had to do with their gender. They just put them in the role, because women will do it differently. They'll do it their own way. But time and time again, they bring, these wonderful leadership traits to the workplace. And, in the end, I think they just need a shot.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. As we prepare to close, I would ask you if there was one tidbit of information around this whole hashtag #MeToo movement that you would want to share with either your younger self or either someone who's in leadership now or looking to kind of ascend to those levels. What would be that one piece of advice or nugget that you would share?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I would say is that, it's all about confidence and self-confidence. Success in the workplace, I think a lot of it has to do with confidence. You talked about men, and sometimes they just bring a lot more confidence into the workplace. And I think whether it's the confidence to take that big job or to stretch yourself or move into a position you don't feel that qualified for, but somebody obviously thinks you are, or the confidence that when you are truly wronged and something inappropriate has taken place, that you stand for yourself and you are willing to tell the truth, and you believe that that's your responsibility, towards other people in the workplace, to just speak the truth and not be afraid. So I guess that's what resonates for me as I think about what's really important.
You think about how we rear our girls and how we rear our boys. And it's only now that we've started to say, no, little girl, you better have confidence too, right?
Yeah, that's right.
We didn't necessarily rear young ladies and girls and women that way.
That's right.
I see the change happening.
Yeah, yeah. Say one more thing that I think is equally important is what we tell our boys, if not more important. And, the task of rearing a boy who understands Me Too and will champion women and all the things we talked about is as important as teaching girls to stand up for themselves.
Kim, I would know nothing about that. I have a wife, 2 girls, female dog, and now a granddaughter. Clearly, there's just no testosterone in my family and legacy coming along. So I'll stick with the women. I guess I did better anyway. But I will take that and heed that advice as I work with and mentor young men. And thank you for joining me here today. Clearly, we both like a little bit of discomfort because this is one of those discomforting conversations, if you will.
Right.
And so, thank you, and I would love to have you back on another topic.
Wonderful. My pleasure, Kevin. I enjoyed it. Thanks for bringing the topic forward.
Oh, absolutely. Have an epic day.
If you join us here each and every week, you'll get a tidbit of information and insight that'll help you be the best version of yourself. Come back next week. Be sure to join us on Facebook within the Facebook group. Check us out on Twitter and on Instagram. Kevin D. Wright. Look us up. Check us out. Link to us online. Love to hear from you. Unlike some of the other podcasts, I want to hear directly from you, and I will answer your question. There's no question too tough, so together we can solve it. Stop back and tell a friend. Leadership is personal. Here's the better results.